in a town where whispers roam. A wolf-turned man found a place called home. Sunlight streams through the window panes, a cozy bookstore where magic reigns. Pages turn with every heart's desire, filling the air with tales that inspire. By day it's quiet, the world feels still, but as dusk falls, it's time for the thrill. When the sun goes down and the stars ignite, the wolf among us comes alive at night. Friends gather round with laughter and cheer. In the heart of the stories we hold our dear. Games on the table, love and delight. In this little bookstore, everything's right. He weaves the stories of distant lands, with creatures that play in the palm of his hands. The whispers of legends fill the room, from dragons to dreamers, the shadows bloom. In the laughter we forget our fears, sharing our hopes, the dreams of our years. The flicker of candles, the warm glow inside. In the embrace of tales we let love guide. When the sun goes down and the stars ignite, the wolf among us comes alive at night. Friends gather round with
And still, I forget to unmute myself. Okay, closed captions are saying they're on, and it's understanding me so far. I have to check to see which ones I have set up. Why is it saying closed captions disabled? That is weird. It's showing me they're on. Anyway, it is Thursday, I think. Hey, Guilty. Welcome in. Yes, congratulations on getting third. I don't know why it's not letting me see the captions. They're turned on my end. says we're supposed to show when streaming. I don't know. It's showing in my previews and everything else. Oh well. Just one more technical issue. Should be used to those by now here. But we are reading again tonight. We're going back into The Mummy. And if anyone wasn't here last time, the galvanic battery was attached, and it seemed like all hell broke loose. It's a thunderstorm happened outside the pyramids. Everyone was scared inside of it. Their guide turned into a babbling idiot. The professor managed to get outside, but Edric, who had done the attachment, I was sworn he saw the mummy open his eyes and stare at him, and stand over him before he blacked out. So it will be interesting to see where things go from here. So, let's switch over to the study. Let's see, make sure the background audio is working fine. That looks good. My audio level looks good. May turn the fireplace down just a little. There's a Wimpod in chat. It's been a long day. If my step tracker is right, I did like 40,000 steps. My smartwatch keeps disconnecting itself. That doesn't do anyone any good. Okay, my watch just says 4800. Where did my ring pick up? Okay, my ring says 3,000. What the hell? Okay, I thought it walked a lot more than that.
Bro, why are you buying all these roaster ovens? Bro, do you not see this?
I hate it when ads pop up. Mute my phone. But anyway, it's about time to start reading Mummy. I've got 2 bottles of water, so I don't have to worry about hydrating. Why is it already giving me bad signals? Anyway. Chapter 10. We left Dr. Entwerfen in the last chapter uttering a very moral, if not a very new, exclamation on the vanity of human expectations, which had scarcely escaped from his lips ere cruel fate, resolving not to be accused in vain, supplied him with yet more abundant cause for lamentation. We have before mentioned that the doctor had stumbled as he quitted the pyramids, and that his friends raised him from the ground. But what was his consternation and dismay when, on looking round to thank them, he found he was surrounded by armed men who commanded him in their royal name to surrender. Welcome to our Pixel Doctor. Sadly did the doctor turn his woeful eyes upon Edric, but alas, he was in the same predicament as himself, and in spite of their entreaties, they were marched off to prison without being at all informed of what crime they had committed. Sadly passed the night, and gloomy dawned the day upon the unfortunate travelers, whose minds were harassed and bewildered by the extraordinary success of their awful experiment, and whose misery was infinitely increased by the suspense they had to suffer, both on account of their ignorance of the crime of which they were accused, and its probable punishment if they should be found guilty. Soon after daybreak, however, a summons for them arrived, and they were conducted as criminals before the same magistrate who, the day before, had treated them with such officious kindness. Very different, however, was the solemn judge who, clothed in all the insignia of magisterial dignity, now sate upon the bench. From the easy, good-tempered gentlemen of the pyramids, the unlucky travelers saw, in an instant, that they were not likely to experience any favor from their previous acquaintance with him. The court thronged with people, and the prisoners saw that they were regarded with curiosity, mingled with horror and supernatural fear. It is not agreeable to feel oneself an object of disgust to anyone, and though Edric magnanimously and frequently repeated himself that it was quite indifferent to him what such ignorant wretches of Egyptians thought of him, yet if he would have avowed the truth, he would have been quite as well contented to find himself the object of their admiration instead of their hatred, and he would have been very glad to have been safely at home again, whilst the doctor openly and loudly lamented such regretted comforts of his own dear delightful study at Sir Ambrose's. Little time, however, was allowed for reflection, for as soon as the prisoners were placed at the bar, their examination commenced. "So, gentlemen," said the learned judge, "you stand convicted, no, I mean accused, of the most horrible, heinous, and sacrilegious offense, an offense that makes our hair start with horror from our heads, and every separate lock rise up in vengeance against you." The justice paused, that the prisoners might admire his eloquence. But alas, such was the absorbing nature of self-love, and they were only thinking of what was going to be done with them, and to what this terrible exordium was likely to lead. After a short pause, Edric, supposing that they were expected to speak, addressed the judge, and begged to know of what crime they were accused. "We are strangers," he said, "and gentlemen. We were attracted to your country by an account of the wonders it contained. We declared our purposes openly. We have affected no concealment, and we have done nothing we need blush to avow." A confused murmur ran through the court as he spoke, expressive of the utmost disgust and abhorrence. Edric felt indignant, and he looked round proudly as he added, "Yes, I repeat, we have done nothing we need blush to avow, and nothing derogatory to our characters as Englishmen and gentlemen." "Sorcerers, wizards, demons in disguise!" cried the crowd. "Down with them! Burn them! Guillotine them! Destroy them!" "Is this fair? Is this generous?" asked Edric. "If we have done wrong, let our crime be proved, and we are ready to submit to any punishment you may think proper to inflict. But do not condemn us unheard. In England, every man is deemed innocent until he is proved guilty. You boast of having imported and improved upon all the useful regulations of the mother country, and cannot surely have omitted her most glorious law. Let us then have a fair trial, and God forbid that the court of justice should be impeded." "Talk well, sir," said the judge, "but it's of no use here. My chair, sir, is made of witch elm, and the whole court is lined with consecrated wood. You may take your familiars to another market, for here they will avail you nothing." "Good God!" exclaimed Edric, shaking his hands. "What ignorance! What gross superstition! And yet in this man's power is our lives?" "Oh ho!" said the judge, who saw his despair, though he did not exactly know the cause. "I have brought it you to, have I? Yes, yes, I will tell you. No incantations will be of any avail here. And so, clerk, call the witnesses." The first person examined was the man who had been left in the charge of the balloon, and he deposed as follows. "Why, sir," he said, scratching his head, as though he supposed wisdom dwelt in his fingers, and that their touch might give a little to his brain, "your honor told me to call out the posse comitatus and set guard over constables over the gentleman's whirligig. But I thought as how, seeing it was a queer-looking thing, and not likely to tempt anybody to steal it, I might as well save the gentlemen from throwing their money away upon a parcel of idle fellows, and keep watch over it myself." "And so get the reward instead of them," observed the judge. "Why, your honor," said the fellow, grinning, "I thought they might give something that might do me some good, but that it would be nothing against the many." "Very true," remarked the judge. "Go on, Gregory." "Well," continued Gregory, "as I was sitting there thinking of nothing at all, and somehow I believe I had fallen into a bit of a doze, I heard a queer sort of buzzing and opened my eyes, and there I saw the gentleman's whirligig buzzing and puffing like a steam engine on fire, and in the midst of the smoke, take my oaths, I saw the mummy of King Cheops as plain as I see the worship there sitting in his throne." "Oh!" groaned the horror-struck crowd. "Oh!" cried the judge and jury. "Yes," continued the man, "I'll take my oath, if it were the last word I had to speak, and that I saw him there, vomiting fire, and his big eyes flaring like a fiery furnace." "Oh!" groaned the judge, crowd, jury, a degree louder than before. "And then," resumed Gregory, "something went whiz, and off it all fled together like a flash of lightning. "Oh!" shrieked the whole court in a convulsion of horror. Some of the fair sex in particular screamed and covered their faces, as though they feared the next exploit of the redoubtable magicians would be to blow up the court and send them all flying after the resuscitated mummy. "With your permission, sir," said Edric, as soon as the tumult had somewhat abated, "this proves nothing against either my friend or myself. We are, in fact, injured by it. We have a claim against you instead of your being able to subsist a charge against us. We left our balloon containing valuable articles and money to a considerable amount in your charge, or at least in the custody of the man you recommended. When we get to the pyramid, of course, inquired of our balloon. It had vanished. Instead of making us amends for our loss, you throw us into prison and tell us a wild, extravagant story of the disappearance of our property, which no man in his senses can possibly believe." Another confused murmur, though very different in its character than the former, ran through the court on the conclusion of his speech, and the judge, if such an expression be not profane when speaking of a representative of justice, looked most excessively foolish. "Had not your worship better call the other witnesses?" whispered the clerk, pitying the dilemma of his principal. "True, true," said the liturgist of Anglo-Egypt. "Your observation is premature, young man. When the case has been proved against you, it will be time enough for you to think of your defense." Edric bowed in assent, and the examination continued. The guide was your next witness. "Well, Samuel," asked the judge, "what do you know of this matter?" "Why, sir," replied Samuel, "you see, my dame and I were sitting by the fire, and we'd got black pudding, as well as we were going to have our dinners, and so I says, 'Dame, I like it cut and sliced and fried,' and so I says, 'Old fellow,' cried the judge, with great dignity, 'don't abuse the patience of the court. We have nothing to do with your dame or the black pudding. It's quite irrelevant to the matter before us. Now go on.' But Samuel could not go on, and like his predecessor in the witness box, he only stood still and scratched his head. "Why don't you speak, fellow?" asked the clerk. "Because I don't know what to say," replied Samuel. "You must tell all you know about this affair," pursued the clerk. "But I don't know where to begin," rejoined the perplexed witness. "His worship says it is not reverent." "Begin with the pyramid," said the judge, "and, if you can, give a clear account of all that happened after you left the old passage by the movable block in the wall that was last discovered." "Why, I can't say there's anything very peculiar happened, as I know of, sir," said Samuel. "After that, till we got to the shaft, and we then went down, sir, you know, we always does, till we came to the tomb of King Cheops, and then I turned the gentlemen in by themselves, as we always does, for the effect of Parson snoring, he calls it. And then I sits me down in the vault and I wait for him, and I just rolled myself up and was dozed asleep when I hear such a noise as if the pyramids were tumbling around my ears. So I jumped up and rubbed my eyes, for I did not know very well where I was. Then I saw something that seemed to strike the torches out of the hands of two great spinning figures, and putting them out. And then I saw a great tall figure come gliding by me, and when he came to the light, I saw his great flaming eyes, and then I fell upon my knees, and he laid hold of my shoulder and gripped it. 'Look, your honor,' laying bare his shoulder, he spoke, showing the deeply indented marks of the bony fingers of the mummy." Again a groan of horror and indignation ran through the court, when another witness proved that the sarcophagus of Cheops had been examined, and was found empty. The judge seemed to think it was a clear case, and called triumphantly upon Edric for his defense. "I do not see that what has been proved," said Edric, shuddering in spite of himself, "can affect either my tutor or myself. These people say that a mummy was revived and quitted the pyramid in which she had been long so entombed, and flown away in our balloon. But supposing the tale be true, what proof have you that we were all implicated in the business? We were in the pyramid, it is true, but so also was this man, whom you have brought forward as a witness against us. Supposing it was the intervention of some human aid that roused the mummy from its tomb, a fact, by the way, by no means proved, why may he be the agent instead of us? What is there to fix the charge against us? We have gained anything by this adventure? We have not. On the contrary, been serious losers by it. Where is our balloon and the valuable articles contained? If we are wizards, it must be confessed that we are very foolish ones, for we have lost our property and thrown ourselves into prison without reaping the smallest possible advantage. And if we have the power you admit to attribute to us, why do we stay here to be questioned, when we might so easily fly away in a flame of fire, or turn you all into statues, or quietly walk off without you being able to follow us? Thank you for that, Andre. Everyone shuddered and turned pale at this speech, seeming to fear that Edric was about to put his suggestions into execution, whilst the judge seemed posed and in a vast perplexity as to what he had better determine, and the people were dreadfully afraid lest they might, after all, lose the edifying spectacle of an auto de fe, for which they had been so impatiently longing. Edric marked the hesitation of the judge, and endeavored to improve it to his own advantage. For my part, continued he, I am a British subject, and as such under the protection of my own court. My sovereign has a consul here, and to him I make my appeal. I am neither ignoble nor unknown in my country. My name is Montagu, and I am the brother of a celebrated general of that family, whose victories, no doubt, have reached even this remote province. My dear Mr. Montagu, said the judge, I really beg your pardon. Why did you not acquaint me sooner with your dignity? I dare say there is no truth at all to the charge. But assure me upon your honor that you did not touch the mummy, and that you know nothing of what it became of as its presence. I will instantly order you set at liberty. I certainly do not know what has become of it, replied Edric, but no, interrupted Dr. Entwerfen, coming forward with the air of the determined martyr. I will not suffer evacuation. I would rather perish at the stake than disavow for a moment my opinions, or betray my sacred interests of science with which I feel I am entrusted. No, sir, my pupil cannot make the public declaration you require. I know he would not, and he cannot if he would. On the contrary, I avow the fact. We came here for the express purpose of endeavoring to resuscitate the mummy of Cheops, and I glory in the proud thought that we have succeeded. There was a groan of horror. Yes, sir. I do not hesitate to avow openly that the grand object of my life, for several successive years, has been to detect in what consisted the strange and inexplicable secret of life. We live, sir, we die, we are born, and we are buried. We know that time, sickness, or violence may kill us, but who can say what the mysterious principle of life consists? Various theories have been broached, with which, no doubt, a gentleman of your intelligence and extensive information is well acquainted, and life has been successfully stated to depend upon the heart, the brain, and circulation of the blood, and the respiration of the lungs. All, however, are fallacious. The heart has been wounded, the brain has been removed, and yet the patient has lived, whilst the operations of respiration and circulation have been kept up for hours in a body which the vital spirit has departed. Weighing all these and divers other arguments in mind, it has struck me, and I indeed may say, after the mature deliberation, I have confidently arrived at the conclusion that both the faculties which we call life and soul depend entirely upon the nervous system. Do not all philosophers agree that we are to receive ideas merely through the medium of the senses? And can our senses be operated upon otherwise than through the intelligence of our nerves? Ergo, the nerves alone convey ideas and sensations to the mind, or rather, the nerves alone are the mind. Not a single instance, I believe, is known in which life remained after the sensorium has been destroyed, or even seriously injured. What then can be more simple than to suppose life resides there? Pursuing this idea, I have long been convinced that the nervous system remained uninjured and the appearance of death is only occasioned by a suspension of the operation of animal functions, that life might be restored, if, by the intervention of a powerful agency, the nervous system could be excited to reaction, and as this, of course, could not be effected if any other kind of decomposition had taken place, it appeared to me that the mummy was the only body upon which the experiment could be tried with the least prospect of success. From various circumstances, however, it has never been till now in my power to realize the wishes in my head, and for the past few weeks my pupil has entertained similar longings as myself, and yesterday we saw our hopes accomplished. Yes, I flatter myself there cannot now remain a shadow of doubt in the world that, in ordinary cases, before decomposition has taken place, the resuscitation is not only possible, but probable, and the dead bodies may be easily restored to life. The horror and consternation produced by this extraordinary speech amongst the Anglo-Egyptians who heard it far exceeded any human powers of description. Their horror at what they considered as the doctor's daring impiety being considerably augmented by not their understanding of 1/10 of a part of what he said. And when he had finished, there was a dead pause which no one dared to interrupt, till a sudden gust of wind happened to blow open the door of the justice's retiring room. The terrified crowd fell back aghast upon the other, pale and trembling, and though they absolutely expected his infernal majesty to appear before them, corporea persona. When tranquillity was in some degree restored, the judge ordered the prisoners to be reconducted to prison. After the dangerous and impious speech we've just heard, he said, it would be madness to trust such suspected persons at large, and yet I would willingly take some time to consider the case, to ascertain whether this young man be indeed the person he represents himself as. As I own, I should be sorry to inflict the full penalty of the law upon the brother of her Britannic Majesty's Commander-in-Chief. Remonstrance was useless, and the prisoners were again conducted to their dungeon, where they were heavily chained and left to ruminate upon the calamities that had befallen them. Far from agreeable were these meditations, for Edric was too angry with the doctor's ill-timed candor to be inclined to speak. The doctor was much too ashamed of the effect already produced by his eloquence to wish to make any further display of it. At length, as his eyes became accustomed to the faint glimmering light admitted into the dungeon, he perceived the wall to which he was chained was covered with hieroglyphics, and endeavored to divert his chagrin by examining them. "I congratulate you, sir," said Edric, when he perceived this, feeling rather indignant at his tutor's coolness. "I congratulate you most sincerely upon your philosophy, and most earnestly do I wish that I could imitate it." "Ah, Edric," returned the doctor, "all men are not equally gifted with either the art of making blunders or forgetting them," said Edric pointedly. "These hieroglyphics are very curious," observed the doctor, who had his own reasons for not wishing to pursue the subject. "See how beautifully the ancient Egyptians worked in granite. Fine polish they contrived to give of this hard substance would be perfectly astonishing, if we did not recollect that they always edged their tools with emerald dust." Said Edric, in a tone which seemed to imply, "And what does it matter to me if they did?" The doctor, however, was unabashed, and continued, "You see, as usual, the figure of the bull is frequently repeated here. This wall was evidently built of stones gathered from some ancient ruin. By the way, Edric, I don't think I ever explained to you why the ancient Egyptians served the bull as one of their deities, or rather, as their principal one. You know, the ancient in the years began in Taurus, though, by the presentation of the equinox, and now it has advanced past Aries. Well, as ancient Egyptians found that the sun began its career in Taurus, what would be more natural than they should identify the bull with their vilifying principle? The same theory may account to the legend of the Chaldeans, which supposes the world to have been produced by a bull striking chaos with its horn, which horn, by the way, was probably the origin of the fable of Almathea, or the Horn of Plenty." Edric made no reply, but the doctor drew a pause, which might give his pupil an opportunity of upbraiding him, and went on. "Though the Egyptians had a number of divinities, they clearly worshipped only two, viz., the principles of good and evil, Osiris, Isis, Khneph, Thoth, Horus, and all their hosts of inferior deities were clearly type of the first, and the light and life were their essence, whilst Typhon, Kempsa, and the malignant dignities exemplified the second, and their attributes were invariably darkness and death. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" cried Edric, "say no more upon this subject, for it is not the power of language to describe the horror I have of the mere thought of anything Egyptian. Let us escape from this fearful country, and I most sincerely hope nothing may ever happen to recall even its recollection to my imagination." "Such and so chargeable are the desires of human life," said the doctor. "But a few short weeks since, Egypt was the goal of your wishes, and the prospect of reanimating a corpse." "Oh, do not mention it!" cried Edric, shuddering. "Oh God, how am I to justify I am punished by the very fulfillment of my hallowed hopes? Even now the fearful eyes of that hideous mummy seem to glare upon me, and even now I feel the grip of its horrid bony fingers on my arm." "Oh yes, no doubt," exclaimed the doctor. "He pinched hard. He was a king, and kings should have strong arms, you know." "Oh, for God's sake, do not jest upon the subject," cried Edric. "A subject so wild and fearful that I can still scarcely believe but which is past as a dream." "If it be," said the doctor, "it is one from which I frequently avow I should be very happy to awake, for I must confess this prison is not at all to my taste." "Hey, Matsu." "And yet, is it not your fault?" said Edric. "Recrimination, Edric, is always folly," interrupted the doctor, who did not now feel very proud of the part he had acted as part of the magistrate, not very anxious to have it alluded to. "Instead of losing time and regretting the past errors, it is part of the wise man to endeavor to find means of remedying them and avoiding them in the future." Twitch is a pain anyway. Okay. Of course, I have my viewer count turned off. "Agreed," returned Edric. "And as I presume you are now convinced your learned dissertation on the probable seat of human life was, to say at least, ill-timed, we will drop the subject. But even if we got out of prison, what will become of us? Our money and valuables were still on the balloon, and here we are, in a foreign country, entirely destitute." "Not entirely, Edric, not entirely," cried the doctor, a glow of satisfaction spreading itself again over his face. "No, no, I have guarded against that. Ah, what a thing it is to have foresight! While some persons are certainly singularly gifted in that line, and it is a happy thing for you that I have somebody to think for you. See here," displaying the things as he spoke. "Here's a bed, bolster, and pillows, ready for inflation, and a portable bedstead, linen, soap, pens, ink, candles, fire, knives, forks, spoons, and money, all snugly packed up in my walking stick." "Your supporter," returned Edric, smiling, "as you used to call it. Oh, now it seems to likely prove more senses than one." "Yes, yes," cried the doctor. "Let us only get out of prison, and all will be rest as easy." "But that only, doctor?" "Of that we must take some time to consider." "Well, it is some comfort that will likely be allowed some time, and my hint respecting the British consul did not seem thrown away upon the judge. Oh, doctor, if you had not spoken—" "Why, surely you would have not given him the declaration he required." There was no occasion. He neither wished nor expected more than he already had. After what I had mentioned of the family, he only wished a decent pretext for setting us at liberty. At any rate, said the doctor, by way of changing the subject, you see my doctrine is proved completely by the recitation of the mummy, for it would have been perfectly restored to life and consciousness, or it could not have flown away with the balloon. For my part, returned Edric, I can scarcely believe what has occurred to be real. There must be some deception, and yet, by whom can a deception have been practiced, and for what purpose? In short, I am quite bewildered. The doctor, being much in the same condition, could only sympathize with his pupil, and in this state we must leave them, whilst we inquire respectfully the mysterious object of their speculations. The mummy, thus strangely recalled to life, was indeed Cheops, and horrible were the sensations that throbbed through every nerve as returning consciousness brought with it all the pangs of his former existence, and renewed circulation thrilled through every vein. The first impulse was to quit the tomb in which he had been so long immured, and seek again the regions of light and day. Instinct seemed to guide him for this. As yet, a mist hung over his facilities, and the ideas thronged in painful confusion through his mind, which he was incapable of either arranging or analyzing. When, however, he reached the lights, plain air seemed to revive him and restore his scattered senses, and gazing wildly around, he exclaimed, "Where am I? What is this place? Methinks all seems wondrous, new, and strange. Where is my father? And where is my Irisane? Alas, alas!" Continued he wildly, "I have forgotten. I hoped 'twas a fearful dream, for methinks I have long been asleep. Was it in reality, indeed? Are all gone? And what was that hideous scene true? Those horrors that still haunt my memory like a ghastly vision. Speak, speak!" continued he, his voice rising in the thrilling energy as he spoke. "Speak! Let me hear the sound of another's voice before my brain is lost in madness. Have I entered Hades, or am I still on earth? Yes, it is still earth, for there the mighty pyramid I caused to be erected towers behind me. Yet where is Memphis? Where are my forts, my palaces? What a dark, smoky mass of buildings now surrounds me. Can this be the once proud queen of cities? Oh no, I see no palaces, no temples. Memphis is fallen. The mighty barrier that protected her splendor from the waste of waters must have been swept away by the encroaching inroads of the swelling Nile. But is this the Nile?" continued he, looking wildly upon the river. "Sure, I must be deceived. It is the fatal river of the dead. No paddling boats glide smoothly on its surface, but strange, infernal vessels, vomiting forth volumes of fire and smoke. Holy Osiris, defend me! Where am I? Where have I been? A misty veil seems thrown upon the face of nature. Awake, awake!" cried he, with a scream of agony. "Set me free! I do not mean to slay him!" Then, throwing himself violently upon the ground, he lay for some moments, apparently insensible. Then, slowly rising, he looked at himself, and in a deep, unnatural shuddering convulsed his whole frame. The sensations of identity became confused, and he recoiled with horror from himself. "These the trappings of a mummy!" murmured he in a hollow whisper. "Am I then dead?" The next instant, however, he broke into a wild laugh of derision. "Poor feeble wretch!" cried he. "What do I fear? Need I tremble? In whose bosom dwells everlasting fire? No, let me rejoice. I cannot be more wretched. Why then should I dread the change? I should rather welcome it with transport and bravely dare my fate." And at this moment the car of the balloon caught his eye. "Ah, what is that?" he cried. "I am summoned. 'Tis a boat of Hecate, ready to ferry me to the Marian lake and learn my final doom. I come, I fear no judgment. My hell is here. And striking his bosom, leapt into the car and stamped violently against its sides. In an instant, Gregory awoke. His terror was not surprising. The dried, distorted features of the mummy looked yet more hideous than before, and animated by human passions, and his deep, hollow voice, speaking in a language he did not understand, fell heavily upon his ear like the groans of fiends. Gregory tried to scream, but he could not utter a sound. He attempted to fly, but his feet seemed nailed to the spot on which he stood, and he remained with his eyes fixed upon the mummy, gasping for breath, while cold sweat distilled from every pore. In the meantime, Cheops had stumbled over the box containing the apparatus for making the inflammable air, and striking it violently, had unintentionally set the machinery in motion. The pipes, tubes, and bellows instantly began to work. The Indian rubber bottle became gradually inflated, while it swelled into an enormous magnitude and fluttered in the air like an imprisoned bird, beating itself against the massive walls in which it was attached. "It still goes not!" cried Cheops, again stamping impatiently. The quicksilver vapor bottle had fallen beneath his feet, and it broke when he trod upon it. The vapor mist burst from it with inconceivable violence, and tearing the balloon from its fastenings, sent it off through the air like an arrow darting from a bow. The mummy is free and confused. Okay, I think I may go ahead and run ads now, since it's only 15 minutes till the start. And then we'll come back with Chapter 11. I will see you all in a bit. Thank you, everyone who hung around. So, what do you think of the story so far? The mummy doesn't understand how he was brought back to life. Then saw that he was a mummy and wondered about how he had died. He apologized for killing whoever he'd killed beforehand. So, will the mummy be good or bad? I guess we'll have to find out. But I guess he did just commit Grand Theft Balloon. And why would he mention Hecate? And why would he say Hecate's boat to deliver him to judgment? Seems curious. But now we get to find out what's going on in England. Chapter 11. In the meantime, Sir Ambrose Montagu had been presented to the Queen, and the evening after his arrival in town he attended her drawing room. The splendor of the English court at this period defies description. The walls of the room in which the Queen received her guest were literally one blaze of precious stones, and these, being disposed in the form of bouquets, wreaths, and trophies, were so contrived as to quiver with every movement. These magnificent walls were relieved by a colonnade of pillars of solid gold, around which were twined wreaths of jewels fixed also upon the elastic gold wires, so as to tremble in every instant. The throne of the Queen was formed of gold filigree, beautifully wrought, richly chased, and superbly ornamented, whilst behind it was an immense plate of looking-glass, stretching the whole length and height of the apartment, and giving the whole the effect of a fairy palace. The carpet spread upon the floor of this sumptuous saloon was so exactly an imitation of green moss, which exquisitely beautiful groups of flowers thrown carelessly upon it, that a heedless spectator might have been completely deceived by the delicacy of their shape and the richness of their coloring, and would have stooped to pick them up, supposing them to be real. The suite of rooms appropriated to dancing was equally splendid, and fitted up in the same manner, save the floors were painted to imitate the effect of the carpet, and rows of trees were placed on each side, hung with lamps. This imitative grove was so exquisitely managed that the spectator could scarcely believe it artificial, and the music for dancing proceeded from its leaves, or from an automaton birds placed carelessly among its branches. The dresses of the Queen and her attendants were worthy of the apartment they occupied. Brocaded silks, cloth of gold, embroidered velvets, gold and silver tissues, and gossamer nets made of the spider's web, were mingled with precious stones and superb plumes of feathers in a profusion quite beyond description. The most beautiful of the female inhabitants, however, were robes made of woven asbestos, which arrayed in loose trousers, which hung over which hung drapery. Hold on. Try this again. The most beautiful of the female habiliments, however, wore robes made of woven asbestos, which glittered in the brilliant light like molten silver. The ladies were all arrayed in loose trousers, over which hung drapery in graceful folds, and most of them carried on their heads streams of lighted gas forced through capillary tubes into plumes, fleur-de-lis, or any sort of form the wearer pleased, which, just a few, had an uncommonly chaste and elegant effect. The gentlemen were all clothed in the Spanish style, with slashed sleeves, short cloaks, and large hats, ornamented with immense plumes of ostrich feathers, it being considered in those days extremely vulgar to appear with the head uncovered. It would, perhaps, have been difficult to imagine more perfect models of male and female beauty than those which now adorn the court of Queen Claudia, where the beau ideal of the painter's fancy seemed realized, nay, surpassed by the living noble figures they collected. The women were particularly lovely, and as they stood gathered around their queen, or lightly treaded the masses of the graceful dance, dressed as above described, their brows bound with circlets of precious stones, and their glossy hair hanging in rich luxuriant ringlets upon their ivory shoulders, they looked like a group of Horace, or the nymphs of Circe, ready with sparkling eyes and witching voices to lure men to destruction. Claudia was very handsome, and though her countenance wanted expression, her noble figure and majestic being well qualified her to play the part of the queen amongst this bevy of beauties with becoming dignity. There is something in the habit of command, when it has been long enjoyed, that gives the imposing majesty to the matter, which the parvenu great strive in vain to imitate, and Claudia had this in perfection. The consciousness of beauty, power, and high birth swelled in her bosom, and even when she wished to be affable, she was only condescending. She now, however, received Sir Ambrose most graciously. She gave him her snowy hand to kiss, and addressed a few words of compliment to him, which sank deep into his heart. It is one to hear the privileges of greatness easily to excite emotions. One word of commendation from those above us far outweighs all the labored flattery of our inferiors. Thus the words of Claudia, and the warm praise she bestowed upon Edmund, gave the purest transports to his father's heart, and affected him so violently that he would have fallen at her feet, had he not been supported by a young man who stood near him. "You seem faint, sir," said the youth. "Will you permit me to lead you to a seat?" Thank you," cried Sir Ambrose, gratefully accepting the proffered aid, and leaning on his youthful supporter as they left the presence. The stranger carefully placed Sir Ambrose upon a sofa, under the harmonious trees we had already mentioned, and as he stood before him, asking if he should procure him some refreshments, Sir Ambrose had full leisure to survey his face and figure. Both were handsome in the extreme. The youth seemed scarcely to have passed the age of boyhood, and his well-proportioned form displayed all the lightness and activity of youth. But wit and good humor laughed in his bright blue eyes, whilst animated figures of the enchanting smile completed his ensemble, which few bosoms were frozen enough to resist. Sir Ambrose was irresistibly pleased, and longed to know to whom this fellow was indebted for such kindness. But he felt too delicate to ask the question in direct terms, and there was nothing in the youth's exterior to mark decidedly to what rank in life he might belong. He was handsomely dressed, and his air and manner appeared slightly foreign, though this might be fancy, arising from Sir Ambrose's ignorance of the manners and habits of the court. There also seemed something droll about him, and the air in which he submitted to Sir Ambrose's scrutiny was excessively comic. "Is there anything I can do for you?" asked he at length, when he thought the baronet's curiosity had had time to satisfy itself. "Nothing," replied Sir Ambrose, "But you would like to know who I am," said the stranger. "I own," returned Sir Ambrose, blushing, "I would fain to know whom I am so much obliged." My name is Henry Seymour, replied the youth. I was born in Spain of English parents. I am an orphan and in want, and have been introduced to the Queen in hopes of getting a place at the court by one of Her Majesty's physicians, Dr. Coleman. "I'm quite ashamed," said Sir Ambrose. "That's my indiscreet curiosity, that is, that you should have thought, that I should have asked for." "In short," interrupted the youth, "you think perhaps that I meant to call you rude for giving such a long account of myself, but I always do so in similar cases. It saves trouble." Sir Ambrose smiled. "You are a singular youth," he said. "I should like to know you better." "I am," returned the stranger, "should be proud to obtain the friendship of Sir Ambrose Montagu, and shall always reckon the day that introduced me to his notice as one of the happiest in my life." The glow of pleasure spread over the animated features of the youth as he spoke, and Sir Ambrose fancied his accent sounded slightly Irish. Convinced, however, that he must be mistaken, he did not mark for it, but only exclaimed, "You know me, then?" Before the stranger had time to utter a reply, the Duke of Cornwall and the Princess Rosabella and Elvira approached, and prevented him from speaking. "How do you find yourself, my dear friend?" said the Duke. "They told us you were ill." "I should have been slightly so," returned Sir Ambrose, "and I believe I should have fainted, and paid my respects to the sovereign quite orientally. But this gentleman did not save me." "Well, I'm sure you are very much obliged to you, sir," said the Duke, returning to the youth. "Indeed, we feel most grateful," said Elvira. The stranger made a suitable reply, and after a short conversation, to which Dr. Coleman joined, the worthy gentleman having been also drawn to the spot by the report of Sir Ambrose's illness, he requested a favour of Elvira's hand for the dance. "That is a very nice young man," said the Duke, when he was gone to join the dancers. "I admire him much." "He deserves everything you can say in his favour," returned Dr. Coleman. "I have known him a long time, and I love him as a son." When Elvira returned to her chamber that night, she sighed so often and so deeply that Emma, who assisted her toilet, could not avoid remarking her uneasiness. "Are you ill, my dear mistress?" said she, in a tone of feeling. "What else can have produced this sudden change?" "I am quite well," said Elvira, sighing. "Then why do you sigh and look so thoughtful?" "I was thinking of Lord Edmund." "Indeed, I did not think he had power to make you sigh. He has reason to feel flattered." "Oh, Emma, I wish you were like Henry Seymour." "And who is Henry Seymour?" asked Emma, smiling and beginning to suspect that she had rather hasty in fancying Lord Edmund, and occasion to flatter himself on account of the princess's tresses. "One of the most fascinating of human beings," returned Elvira. "So gay and yet so tender. He is not, perhaps, so regularly handsome as Edmund, but he has such expressive features, and his soul gives such animation to his countenance." "Poor Edmund," thought Emma, but she was too discreet to say so. Elvira was not aware of the interpretation that might be put on what she was saying, and she went on, ravaging of the pleasures of the ball, till she was fairly in bed. The following day was appointed for the triumphant entry of Lord Edmund, and the greatest part of the night preceding it was passed by Sir Ambrose in the greatest agitation. He could not sleep. He rose several times from his bed, in excessive anxiety, to listen to the repetition of noises which he fancied he heard. Once he opened his window, all was still. His room looked on to the garden of Mr. Montagu, which, as we have already mentioned, shelved down to the Thames, and the calm moonlight swept peacefully upon the tall, thick trees and verdant lawn that spread before him. The evening breeze felt cool and refreshing, but Sir Ambrose sighed, and a strange fear of something he could not wholly define hung over him. He retired to bed, and at length sank into a feverish and uneasy doze. At daybreak, however, the thundering of a cannon announced the arrival of the important day. Sir Ambrose started from his pillow at the first discharge, and the solemn sound thrilled through every nerve it had pealed along the sky. Scarcely had its echoes died upon the ear when another and another peal succeeded, and the heart of Sir Ambrose throbbed in his bosom almost to suffocation as he sat, resting his head upon his hands, and striving, though ineffectually, to stop his ears from the solemn sound, which seemed to absorb his every faculty and strike almost with the force of a blow upon his nerves. Whilst he was still in this position, Father Morris entered the room. "Come, come, Sir Ambrose," cried he, "are you not ready? The Queen has sent for us, and the procession is just ready to start off." Sir Ambrose started. He attempted to dress himself, but his trembling hands refused to perform their office, and Father Morris and Abelard were obliged to attire him, and lead him down to join his friend, the Duke, who was waiting for him impatiently. It has often been said that the anticipation of pleasure is always greater than the reality. This, however, was not the case at this present instant, as the brilliancy of Lord Edmund's triumph was far greater than even the imaginations of the spectators had before dared to conceive. The Duke and Sir Ambrose, attended by Father Morris, found the individuals who were to compose the procession of the Queen assembled in the extensive gardens belonging to the superb palace of Somerset House. The fine gardens, spreading their verdant groves along the banks of the river, adorned by all the charms of nature and art, and enriched by some of the finest specimens of sculpture in the world, were now crowded with all the beauty and rank of England, who, waiting for the arrival of their sovereign, formed an ensemble no other nation in the world could hope to imitate. On the center walk appeared the superb Arabian charger of the Queen, led by his grooms and magnificently caparisoned. His bridle was studded with precious stones, and the hoofs encased in gold, whilst the blue satin saddle and housings were richly embroidered and fringed with the same metal. The noble animal, whose flowing mane and tail swept the ground, paced proudly along, tossing his head on high and spurring the ground on which he trod, so conscious he could perform a conspicuous part in a grand pageant about to take place. All now was ready, but yet Queen Claudia did not appear. "It is very strange, but lately it is always so," said Lord Maysworth to Lord Gustavus de Montfort, who had been for some time engaged in earnest conversation with Father Morris. Lord Gustavus stared at the sound of his friend's voice in some apparent confusion, whilst Father Morris replied in his usual soft, insinuating tones. "Perhaps her Majesty may be indisposed, and have slept rather longer than usual." "Most likely," returned Lord Mayworth. "Yet it is strange the same thing should happen so often, if you remember," continued he, again addressing Lord Gustavus. "I made the same observation the morning of her last levee. Indeed, I have frequently made it lately, and I have observed that she looks pale and languid." "Here she comes, at any rate, and for my part I think I never saw her look better," said Dr. Hardman, who had now joined them, and who, notwithstanding his violent politics, was one of the physicians of the court. The indolence of Claudia, which indeed seemed daily increasing, having induced her to overlook what another sovereign would have resented. Claudia did indeed look well, and her dress suited her well with her style of beauty. Her trousers and vest were of pale blue satin, whilst over her shoulders was thrown a long flowing drapery of asbestos silk, which, hanging in graceful folds, swept the ground as she walked along, shining like the sun, like a robe of woven silver. On her head she wore a splendid tiara of diamonds, and in her hand she bore the royal scepter, surmounted by a dove, and richly ornamented with precious stones. Thus gorgeously attired, surrounded by the ladies of her household, she issued forth from her palace, and whilst kneeling subjects bent in humble homage to her, she mounted her noble charger. Cannon were now fired in rapid succession, and the bells of every church rang in merry peals. The martial music mingled in the clamor. The palace gates were thrown open, and the procession poured from them along the streets, where crowds of human beings bustled. Elegantly attired, walked on each side of the sovereign, scattering flowers in her path from the fancy baskets made of wrought gold. Behind the queen rode the ladies of her household and the principal nobles of her court. The superb plumes of ostrich feathers and the large Spanish hats of the latter, with their immense mustachios and open shirt collars, giving them the air of some Van Dyck's best pictures. As they rode slowly along, their noble Arabians paced proudly and champed the bits, impatient of restraint. The ladies of the court, superbly dressed in open letters, appeared next, borne upon the shoulders of men splendidly clad in rich liveries. Amongst these were Elvira and Isabella. OBS decided to restart itself. No, at least disconnect. These were followed by monks and boys as before, but singing a somewhat different strain. There was now a chant of glory and triumph that swelled upon the ear, for these preceded the Duke and Sir Ambrose, who, the one as uncle of the Queen, and the other as father of the expected hero, occupied the most honor. Two venerable old men sat hand in hand in a sumptuous car drawn by two Arabian horses, and were followed by a large body of the Queen's guards. Is it showing up? The costliness and variety of the dresses worn this day were quite beyond description. Many of the ladies had turbans of woven glass, whilst others carried on their hats very pretty fountains made of glass dust, which, being thrown up in little jets by a small propellant motion wheel, sparkled in the sun like real water, and had very singular effect. That is weird. I have no idea why it says that. I don't know. I've got it saving as a transcript, so. I don't know why it would not work on here, though. Okay. In this manner, the procession advanced towards Blackheath Square, said to be the largest and finest in the world, where the meeting between the Queen and her general was appointed to take place. Amongst the numerous balloons that floated in the air, enjoying a magnificent spectacle, was one containing Father Murphy, who had been prevented, by a sprained ankle, of joining the procession, and the family of Mr. Montagu, and nothing could be more enthusiastic than their delight, as they looked down upon the splendid scene below them. Few things, indeed, could be imagined finer than the sight of this gorgeous cortege, winding slowly along the magnificent street, supposed to be 5 miles long, leading to Blackfriars Bridge, through Greenwich, to Blackheath. Sumptuous rows of houses and other palaces lined the sides of the superb street, the terraces and balconies before which were crowded with persons of all ages, beautifully attired, and waving flags of different colors, richly embroidered and fringed with gold, whilst festoons of the choicest flowers hung from house to house. We have already said the air was thronged with balloons, and the crowd increased every moment. These aerial machines, loaded with spectators till they were in danger of breaking down, glittered in the sun, and presented every possible variety of shape and color. In fact, every balloon in London or the vicinity had been put into requisition, and enormous sums paid, in some cases merely for the privilege of hanging to the cords that attached to the cars, whilst the innumerable multitudes that thus loaded the air amused themselves by scattering flowers upon the heads of those who rode beneath. Besides the balloons, however, there were other variety of modes of conveyance fluttering in the sky. Some dainties bestrode aerial horses inflated with flammable gas, whilst others floated upon wings, or gently glided along, reclining gracefully upon aerial sleighs, the last being contrived to cover a sufficient column of air for their support. As the procession approached the river, the scene became still more animated. Innumerable barges of every kind and description shot swiftly along or glided smoothly over the sparkling water. Some floated with the tide in large boat-like shoes, whilst others reclined on couch-shaped cars, formed of mother-of-pearl, or drawn forward by inflated figures representing the deities or monsters of the deep. When the Queen reached the spot near Greenwich, where, through a spacious opening in the river, and all its glorious majesty burst upon her, she paused, and commanded her trumpeters to advance and sound a flourish. They obeyed, and after a short pause were answered by those of Lord Edmund. The sound, mellowed by the distance, pealed along the water in dulcet harmony. Delighted with this response, which announced the arrival of Lord Edmund and his troops at the appointed place, the procession of the Queen was again set in motion, and in a short time arrived at Blackheath. The noble square in which the meeting was to take place was already thronged with soldiers. Almost every house that surrounded it was covered with spectators. No trees or fantastical ornaments spoiled the simple grandeur of this immense space. The houses that surrounded it, built in exact uniformity, each having been a peristyle supported by Corinthian pillars and a high decorated facade, looked like so many Atlantean temples. When the cortege of the Queen entered the square, the soldiers formed an opening to retrieve it, and reverently knelt on each side, with reversed arms, and bending banners as she passed. In the center was Lord Edmund, surrounded by his staff, all in polished armor, for since the invention had been discovered of rendering steel perfectly flexible, it had been generally used for war. Lord Edmund's helmet, however, was thrown off, and his fine countenance was displayed to the greatest advantage. He and his officers threw themselves from their war steeds and kneeled before the Queen. Claudia also descended from her charger, and as she stood in her glittering robes, surrounded on all sides by kneeling subjects, she looked indeed their sovereign. With becoming dignity, she addressed a few words of thanks and commendation to Lord Edmund as he knelt before her, his thick, dark, brown hair falling in clustered curls round his noble forehead. His graceful figure was shown to the utmost advantage by his closely fitting armor, over which, however, upon the present occasion, was thrown a short cloak of fine scarlet cloth, richly embroidered with gold, and fastened in front by a cord and superb tassel, made entirely of the same metal. He looked a living personification of the god of war. The Queen raised him from the ground in a most gracious manner, and then turning to the still kneeling soldiers, made a short speech to them, of the same nature as that which she presented to Lord Edmund, after which, again mounted her palfrey, she made Lord Edmund ride by her side and prepared to return to town. Edmund's quick eye had discovered and exchanged looks of affection with his father and friends. Through the etiquette of this present situation could not permit him to do more, and now he rode proudly by the side of the Queen, gracefully bowing to the assembled crowd as he passed along, his heart beating with pleasure at the thought that his triumph was witnessed by those most dear to him, whilst his noble Arabian tossed his head and champed his bit as he pranced forward, as though he also knew the part he was performing in the splendid ceremony. Acclamations rent the sky with the proclamations advanced, and showers of roses were rained upon the Queen and her general from the balloons above, from which also flags waved in graceful folds and flapped in the wind, as the balloons floated along the sky. Everyone seemed delighted with the grandeur of the splendid pageant, but no one experienced more pleasure than the occupiers of the balloon of Mr. Montagu. Even that oblivious gentleman himself was moved to exclaim that he never was more enchanted in his life. whilst the raptors of a spouse were so excessive that, like the spectators of the stag hunt on the lake of Killarney, she was in imminent danger of throwing herself overboard in her ecstasy. And Clara clasped her hands together, and all the transports of childish delight, her sparkling eyes and animated looks bearing ample witness to her gratification. "What shouting? What a noise!" exclaimed Mr. Montagu. "I declare it puts me in a mind of the acclamations in the time of Nero, when the Romans shouted in concert, and the birds fell from the skies with the noise."
Papa, is that true?
asked Clara. "Oh, it was a kind of strange question," said Father Murphy, "and one I couldn't like a child of mine to be putting." "And why not?" asked Mr. Montagu, somewhat indignantly. "Because a child ought not always believe what her father says before he hears it open upon his mouth."
"Look how well the Queen looks,"
observed Mrs. Montagu, to whom the Reverend Father's remark was far from agreeable.
"It is said a short time since that she has lost her appetite and could get no rest. I don't think she could have much matter to have done with her now." "Nurse says she's being poisoned," cried Clara. "In that case would be no great matter if she was, for then the people would have to choose a queen for themselves, and they might make the terms they pleased with her."
"And what kind of servant to suffer the tender Gradman, Miss Montagu?" demanded the indignant father, roused from his usual lethargy by the importance of the occasion. "Clara shall go to boarding school tomorrow, and her nurse shall be dismissed. My child shall not be that utter treason."
"Dear me, Mr. Montagu," replied the wife, "what a serious matter you make of a little harmless gossip."
"Gossip, do you call it?" repeated her husband. "It is such gossip as might cost me my head and you your fortune, if it were to reach unfriendly ears." An awkward pause followed his speech, which no one seemed inclined to break, till Clara exclaimed,
"Dear me, what a pretty horse my cousin Edmund rides!"
"I think that's prettier that comes after him," said Father Murphy.
"What? That one with his head hanging down and his mane sweeping the ground?"
asked Mrs. Montagu. "Yes, and it's a very handsome man who rides it also, that walks by the side of him," replied Father Murphy. "His hands are chained as if he was a prisoner, and he looks like a foreigner," observed Mr. Montagu, who had relapsed into one of his fits of abstraction. "I wonder what can bring him here."
"La, Mr. Montagu, how you talk!" exclaimed his wife. "You know my nephew Lord Edmund has just gained a battle, and what can be more natural than he should have been taken prisoner?"
"True," rejoined Mr. Montagu with the utmost naivete. "I never thought of that." "Ugh, it's a barbarous custom of putting chains about the hands of your prisoners," said Father Murphy. "And if it was not bad enough to be a prisoner without looking like one."
"Poor fellow," cried Clara. "I should like to go and let him loose. He looks very melancholy." "How great my nephew Lord Edmund looks," continued Mrs. Montagu. "I declare it, a real king couldn't have the grander appearance. And then to see the poor old gentleman, his father, my brother-in-law, Sir Ambrose, sitting there hand in hand with the Duke of Cornwall himself. I declare it does my heart good to look at them."
Whilst Mrs. Montagu was thus exulting in the reflected grandeur that shone upon her from being sister-in-law to the person who sat hand in hand with the Duke, the joy and delight of that exalted personage had been almost as great as her own. His impatience during the whole procession from London had been excessive, and the moment he saw Edmund, he rubbed his hands in ecstasy, and jumped up from his seat, almost overturned Sir Ambrose, who was also bending eagerly gazing upon his son. "There he is!" cried the Duke. "Look how handsome he is! Oh, the young rogue! There will be many a heart lost today, I warrant me. Look at him! Look how colour comes into his cheeks as the Queen speaks to him! Look, now he helps her on her horse, and see now he's looking round for us. There, I caught his eye. See, Sir Ambrose, don't you see him? Surely you aren't crying, my old friend. Why do you make me as great a fool as yourself? God bless him. I'm sure I don't know anything we have to cry at, but we are two old simpletons. Father Morris, who had joined the procession of monks, was almost as much affected as his patron. Indeed, his affection for Edmund seemed the only human passion remaining in this aesthetic beast. Cold to frigidity in his exterior, Father Morris seemed to regard the scenes passing around him but as the moving figures of a magic lantern, which glittered for a moment in glowing colors, and then vanished into darkness, leaving no trace behind. Was he, unmoved as the wall over which the gaudy but shadowy pageant had passed, saw them alternately vanish and reappear without the slightest emotion being excited in his mind. Under this statue-like appearance, however, Father Morris concealed the passions as terrific as those which might be supposed to throb in the breast of a demon, even though he never commanded himself to relax for a moment. But when the interests of Edmund were in question, on the present occasion, however, joy swelled in his bosom almost to suffocation, and he raised his eyes to heaven, and wringing his hands together, exclaimed, "Oh, it is too much, too much!" There is something indescribably affecting in seeing strong emotion expressed by those who are generally calm and impassioned, and Sir Ambrose, by whom this burst of feeling from his confessor was quite unexpected, gazed at him with the utmost surprise, and, strange to tell, though the monk had now lived nearly 20 years under his roof, it was the first time he had seen his head completely uncovered. Father Morris's cowl had now, however, fallen off entirely, and displayed the head of a man between 40 and 50 years, whose fine features bore the traces of what he had endured. His noble expressive brow seemed wrinkled more by care than age, and his sable locks had evidently become grizzled here and there prematurely. Sir Ambrose gazed upon him intently, for the particular emotion of his features seemed to recall some half-forgotten circumstance to his mind, dimly obscured, however, by the mists of time. The earnestness with which he consequently regarded the monk seemed at length to recall the latter to himself. He started, and whilst a deep crimson flushed his usually sallow countenance, he hastily resumed his cowl, and appeared again to the eyes of the spectators as the same cold, impassioned, abstract being as before. The ovation had now nearly reached Blackfriars Ridge, at the entrance to which the triumphal arch had been erected. The moment the Queen and her heroic general passed under it, a small figure of fame was contrived to descend from its emblazure, and hovering above the hero, to drop a laurel crown upon his head. Shouts and applause followed this well-executed device. The passengers in the balloons, wondering at the noise, all pressed forward in the same moment to ascertain the cause of such continued acclamations. The throng of balloons became thus very instant more dense. Some young city apprentices, having hired each pair of wings for the day, but not exactly knowing how to manage them, a dreadful tumult ensued, and the balloons became entangled with the winged heroes, and each ordered to inextricable confusion. The noise now became tremendous, the conductors of the balloons swearing at each other the most refined oaths, and the ladies screaming in concert. Several balloons were rent in the scuffle, and fell with tremendous force upon the earth, while some cars were torn from their supporting ropes, and others roughly overset. Luckily, however, the whole of England at this time was so completely excavated that falling upon the surface of the earth was like tumbling upon a parchment of an immense drum, and consequently only a deep hollow sound was returned as cargo after cargo of the demolished balloons struck upon it. Some of them, indeed, rebounded several yards with the violence of the shock. Amongst those who fell from the greatest height, and of course rebounded the most violently, were the unfortunate individuals who composed the party of Mr. Montagu, an unlucky apprentice having poked his right wing through the silk of the balloon, in endeavoring to avoid the charge of an aerial horseman, who found his alone steed too difficult to manage in the confusion. The car containing our friends was in consequence precipitated to earth so rapidly as for the moment to deprive them of breath.
"Oh, I'm killed entirely!"
cried Father Murphy.
"Oh, my bonnet! My beautiful bonnet!"
Sobbed Mrs. Montagu, whilst Clara, dreadfully frightened, began to cry, and Mr. Montagu, whose ideas were generally a long time travelling through his brain, particularly upon occasions of sudden alarm, stood completely silent, stupidly gazing about him as though he had not the least notion of what possibly could have happened. Indeed, it was not till a full hour afterwards that he found himself sufficiently recovered to exclaim, "Dear me, I do think we were nearly killed." In the meantime, and the confusion of the air still continued, piercing screams like demons were in the air, mingled horribly with the crashing of balloons, cries of the sufferers, and the successive fallings of heavy weights. The situation of the crowd below, however, was infinitely worse than that of those above. The momentum of the falling bodies being fearfully increased by the distance they had to descend, those below had no chance to escape, and were inevitably crushed to death by their weight, whilst agonizing shrieks of the unfortunate wretches who saw their danger coming from a distance, yet were so jammed together in the crowd that they could not fly, rang shrilly upon the ear, and pierced through every heart. At this moment a dreadful scream ran through the crowd, and the horse of Queen Claudia, his bridle broken, his housings torn, and his nostrils distended, and his sides steaming with gore, rushed past.
"Oh my God! The Queen! The Queen!"
burst from every voice. One general took place towards the spot from whence the cry had proceeded. Beneath the triumphal arch, partially sheltered by its shade, lay the bleeding body of Claudia, supported by Edmund. By her side knelt Rosabella, who, assisted by Father Morris, was applying restoratives, whilst Henry Seymour was endeavoring to restore Elvira, who had fainted in the arms of her father and Sir Ambrose. His face, streaming with blood, stood a little distance amongst a group of courtiers, several of whom had also experienced severe injuries. The tumult in the air still continued, and groans and shrieks and exclamations that the atmosphere was supernaturally haunted were heard in many places, and some persons declared the accident to be the work of demons. A current of wind had blown those balloons that had become unmanageable across the city, while the others, terrified almost to madness, appeared still contending with some fearful monster in the sky. The courtiers, however, heeded not by the disturbance, for all their attention was occupied by the apparently expiring queen, whose long-drawn sighs and convulsed bosom seemed to threaten her most instant dissolution.
"She's gone!"
cried Lord Gustavus of Montfort, as her bosom heaved with a long, deep, heavy sigh, and then was still.
"Yes, she's dead,"
replied Lord Doodle.
"She is certainly dead,"
reiterated Lord Doodle. And then the sapient counsellors of the apparently departed queen shook their wise heads in sympathy. "Hush! She breathes!" cried Lord Edmund. For some moments the courtiers stood in breathless anxiety, watching the body, and fearing to move lest they should break the awful silence that prevailed, though their hearts throbbed until the palpitations were almost audible. Fearful was the pause that now ensued. All were suffering from the torments of hope and fear, for all knew that the interest of the whole community hung upon her breath. Most of the courtiers also either hoped to gain places or feared to lose them, whilst all trembled at the uncertainty that seemed to rest upon their future destiny, and the prospect of the anarchy which the proposed mode of electing their future sovereign might create. The interest which the fate of the queen excited was thus intense, and the courtiers hung over her body with streaming eyes and motionless limbs to watch the result. At this instant, a fearful and tremendous yell ran through the air, and the car containing the mummy, which had been for some time entangled with the other balloons, fell to the ground with tremendous force, close to the expiring queen. The gigantic figure of Cheops started from it as it fell, his ghastly eyes glaring with unnatural luster upon the terrified courtiers who ran screaming in agony in all directions, forgetting everything but the horrid vision before them. Okay. The mummy has arrived in London, and the Queen might be dead. Thank you for the hydrate. Ouch. Hydrated. Ouch. Ooh. My back just popped as I was stretching. I don't think I can get another chapter read before 11. Especially since ads would hit in 13 minutes. But stories with chapters tend to be a lot longer. So now the fun challenge of figuring out who to read to. But thank you everyone who came in. I'm not sure why the closed captions wouldn't be going to the stream. I have to read more of the documentation on the new update. But anyway, does anyone have a read suggestion? Because it looks like Dusk is on, looks like Jiva's on, Felcor's on. Don't see anyone else in writing and reading. That's none of the ones I usually follow. Oh no, Art Griffin's on. Wonder if they're still reading Dracula. Yep, they're still reading Dracula. Okay, we'll read them. So, follower message, subscriber message, now we're gonna go from one classic monster to another. Art Griffin is reading Dracula. So, hopefully I will see you all tomorrow night for some fairy tales. Have a good night.
Not so long ago, in a world full of strife, a man born a wolf, living a dual life. With magic in his veins, he walked the school hall, learning the arts, answering the call. But fear was a cloak he had to wear tight, hiding his truth, keeping darkness from light. Those who were scared turned away in despair, yet he bore the burden, he chose to take care. Now the times have changed, the monster's no longer scared. He's retired from magic, but his stories still flare. with tales of heroes, of legends so grand, selling dreams of the past across this vast land. In the shadows he lingered, where darkness